I'm Michael Edelstein, and as David mentioned, I'm a clinical psychologist in San Francisco, in fact, in this building upstairs. And I do in-person and telephone therapy. And one of my specialties is addictions. I'm also the professional advisor in San Francisco for a self-help group for addictions, and that's called SMART Recovery. SMART stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training. And the groups are open to the public. There's no charge. Anyone can attend. And at these groups, we teach people how they can overcome their addictions. And some of them have been to AA meetings where they learn that they're powerless over their addictions. But at our meetings, we show them how they can use the power they have that they've been using poorly to overcome addictive behaviors. The idea that we're powerless seems on the face of it to make little sense to me, because let's suppose you're addicted to meat. That would mean that the meat knocks them down and stuffs itself in their mouth. Then that would prove that they're powerless. So the truth is they have the power to eat the meat. Obviously they have power. They're just using the power in a self-defeating way. Now, we work with a particular definition of addiction, and that is if you engage in a behavior on a regular basis that interferes with other more important goals, then we call that addictive behavior. So if you have a goal to be a vegan, and from time to time you eat meat or you eat dairy, then that's interfering with that goal, so that would be an addictive behavior. Now, an issue is where addictions come from. And we believe that addictions don't come from a disease or from your dysfunctional family or from the temptations from your friends or that you find at parties, but rather addictions come from your thinking, what you're telling yourself at the moment. And that's predicated on the idea that whenever we act, whenever we do anything, we normally have an idea in our head that leads us to do it. For example, when the alarm rings in the morning and you get out of bed, the alarm didn't force you to get out of bed, but rather you had a thought, if I don't want to be late for work, if I don't want to rush, I better get out of bed right now. Or you might have a different thought, I'm feeling achy, I have a fever, it probably would be a good idea if I stayed in bed. So all our actions are generated by our thinking in that way, and acting addictively is no different.
Toyland, Toyland, wonderful girl and boyland. The amazing, intriguing attraction of an imaginary world. And that really is what the therapy model that we're talking about is. It's an imaginary world. REBT is the acronym, and so we're talking about rational emotive behavior therapy. What is the origin of the therapy? The model is the Stoic philosophy back in the 1st century AD, 2nd century, I think the 2nd century, whatever it was. Epictetus is the man's name. So in this very appealing imaginary world, you are in charge of yourself, of your life, of your thinking, of your emotions, of your actions. And all you have to do is use the right formula, and voila, you have solved any problem that comes your way. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Guess what? It ain't real. Not for most of us. There are a few fortunate people who are so purely rational, and actually REBT works best with those who are already in charge of themselves in their lives. So it's a simple adjustment to rationalize away your behaviors which are not preferred, and you take care of them. But for many of us, and I dare say even perhaps most of us, it's not that easy because we have compelling desires. There's emotional content. There's cravings. And you can sit there and rationalize till you're blue in the face and you ain't going to solve the problem. That's the reality, folks. And so, therefore, what do you do about it? Well, I'll cover that in the next 5 minutes I have here.
I had a client who we'll call Mary, and she came to me because she knew I was a vegan, and she wanted to be a vegan herself for various health and other reasons. And for 3 weeks, she was successful at avoiding meat and dairy and sticking to a vegan diet. Then one session she came in and she said, I blew it. I had a hamburger, and I just can't be a vegan. I can't control myself. I'm powerless. How many people here would agree with her estimation that she's powerless, she can't possibly be a vegan? Okay. David, it looks like the debate's over. I was talking about thoughts in our heads that lead to our behavior, and some of Mary's thoughts were culprits, such as, because I failed in the past, I can't succeed in the future. So one of the things I helped her see is that failure in the past doesn't either equal or necessitate failure in the future. We could probably look at our own history where we failed at things in the past and then ultimately succeeded. Thomas Alva Edison purportedly tried 999 filaments to invent the electric light bulb. None of them worked, but the 1000th one, tungsten, did burn for a long time, and that worked. And if he had said after 800 or 900 failures, I'm a failure, I can't succeed, then we might be having this debate by candlelight. Fortunately, he didn't have that kind of thinking. So the idea is, if you change your thinking, you change your behavior, and obviously we're not powerless to change our thinking. Examples are learning anything, learning a musical instrument or learning a foreign language, learning how to play tennis. We change our thinking. One of the main principles in changing our thinking is the learning principle, which says that reinforcement is the royal road to learning. The more you practice something, reinforce it, go over it again and again and again, the more you start to think differently, as long as what you're thinking and what you're going over is meaningful to you. So if it makes sense on the face of it that past failure doesn't necessitate future failure, and you remind yourself of that over and over again, then after a while you'll come to deeply believe it. Another example of changing addictive thinking is on the sheet I gave out, and it's called 3-Minute Refutations, named after my book, 3-Minute Therapy. And the example there is the thought, I'll just have one drink and then I'll stop. And this is uttered by someone who decided that he never wants to drink again, and then he gave himself an excuse, I'll just have one drink and then I'll stop. Well, that hadn't succeeded for him, because after one drink, he had another drink and another drink and another drink. So under his excuse, I'll just have one drink and then I'll stop, he listed many reasons why that excuse was false or self-destructive, such as, I've tried this many times and it's always gone on to more. Or if I can stop after one drink, I can certainly stop before one drink. Or this is just an excuse, pure and simple, and it goes against my goals. So I have my clients and recommend to the people at our Smart Recovery meetings that they write down their excuse, and then they write down the refutations. That excuse is a lie, it's just a rationalization. And if they practice that on a regular basis, I recommend 3 or 4 or 5 times a day, they write down the excuse and write down the refutations, then they find that when they're tempted, the refutations, the reasons why it wouldn't be a good idea to drink or smoke or shoot up, are more prominent in their mind than the excuse. So that's, that's one of the cognitive strategies people use to change their thinking and change their behavior. Now, the idea of being powerless over addiction has been popularized by the 12 steps, and the first step is we recognize we're powerless over alcohol, something along those lines. Excuse me. I've had clients who have told me that they've gone to the 12-step meetings and they've used that step, that insight, as an excuse to drink because they just convince themselves, well, they're powerless, they can't help themselves, so they might as well drink. And they've made it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Another behavioral strategy that people use to use the power they have over their addictions to change is penalties. And the way you would use that is you set up a goal, for example, no sugar this week, and then you devise a penalty if you have a transgression. For example, you'd send $20 to your least favorite charity. So if you're a Republican, you send $20 to the Democrats. If you're a Democrat, you send $20 to the Republicans if you have sweets. Now, if you're a libertarian, you send $20 to the Republicans and $20 to the Democrats. And that's why libertarians get over their addiction much more quickly than Democrats or Republicans.
Well, now, don't raise your hand, but think about something. How many of you here have ever said to yourself, I am going to stop doing this, whatever it may be, and then you found yourself doing it again later anyway? I'm going to lose 40 pounds. That means cutting down on chocolates and cutting down on this and cutting down on that. And it lasts for how long? A day? A week? Until you have a specially delicious gourmet chocolate treat that's there in front of you, and so then so much for that. Oh, I'll take care of it next time. So the basic core problem is still there, and that is that we have a belief system based on a philosophy which is shallow in nature. That is, everything can be resolved rationally. Does not take into consideration the core drives, passions, cravings that are a part of human nature. And that's the problem. And that's what you have to address. And I'm going to suggest to you that you cannot address it with reasoning it out. You can't address it with a feel-good talking it out session. You can't address it with psychotherapy. There's only one thing you can do. That's not something you can do yourself. That's to experience a changed nature, a new nature. The human heart, that is the seat of the affections, the desires, the passions, is deceitful and desperately wicked. And so human nature wants to believe the best about itself. So we tend to have blind spots. So we can say, well, yeah, I'm really not so bad. And, we develop our own little framework or paradigm of our self-perception. And that can be quite deceptive. I've actually talked to a couple years ago who decided that adultery was all right, and they both left their spouses and married each other. I said, well, God didn't want us to be lonely, so it's okay. So you can deceive yourself into whatever your heart really desires. You can justify things because you really want it. And so the self-deception is something that is really not addressed by the REBT therapy. It assumes an idealistic world which is out of touch with the reality of human nature. So the only solution is to get a new nature, and that comes from outside of yourself.
I'd like to address some of Dave's comments. One was that my argument is based on REBT, rational emotive behavior therapy, and that's really not the case. It's based on observation, studies, what people report, what I've seen in my clinical practice and smart recovery among myself and friends, and that is that people do stop acting addictively on their own. Not everyone. Some people get help through REBT or smart recovery or other ways, but many people just stop on their own. For example, in Stanton Peele's excellent book, Love and Addiction, where he shows that love actually can be an addiction also, and similar things happen in the brain when someone is obsessively, compulsively in love, which I hope that you've been lucky enough to have that experience. But he reports in his book that after the Vietnam War, many soldiers came back who had been using heroin on a regular basis in Vietnam just to be able to put up with the war conditions. And when they came back, many of them just stopped using heroin on their own. Heroin is widely thought to be an addictive drug.
As for REBT, well, that is the basis of the therapies that we've been talking about, and certainly mentioned in the 3-Minute Therapy book and the SMART approach to addiction recovery. And once again, the problem that is not addressed is that while you may deal with one manifestation of an addiction, it often will migrate to something else. And it may be more positive, but you still have it because you still have the inherent compulsive nature that you have not addressed or cured. And that is a core problem. So we're not talking about a Band-Aid, we're talking about cutting to the heart of the issue and getting a change of nature, a new heart. And that is the only way to long-term successfully deal with an addictive personality or inclination. Because once you receive a new nature or a new heart, then you are empowered. The change of the direction of your life changes, and you now have the motivation and the change of priorities that enable you to take advantage of techniques to strengthen that new behavior. I think, as the doctor mentioned, repetition is important, but you first need to purify the springs before you take care of the behaviors. And once you purify the springs, it is easier to deal with the behaviors. And they've often said that it takes 21 continuous, consistent repetitions to change a behavior. I've seen that figure used before.
David made an important point, which I'd like to reinforce because I agree with what I think he's saying, and that is addictions are part of our nature. And I agree with that in the sense that we all have a biological predisposition to go toward pleasure, and when we addict ourselves, we take what's pleasurable and then we keep on doing it to our detriment. So we do have a nature to go toward our pleasant, to what's pleasant. But what mediates this nature inside of us, these biological proclivities, and the outside world is our thinking. So it may be our nature when our bladder is full to relieve it, but yet our brains mediate that and tells us to wait till we get to a bathroom before we do that. So we always have a choice whether we're going to let the influence of our nature and our genetics and predispositions control us or just influence us. And what I'm saying is we can use the power we have to not give in to our nature and to act against it by not acting addictively. There's a finding among street addicts, people addicted to heroin, that often the heroin addiction runs its course from the age of 20 to the age of 40. Then a third of the people who are street addicts addicted to heroin grow out of it. So that's with no REBT, no intervention. That's just a biological maturational process. So that's another way that people can change and shows that they're not powerless.
Well, once again, the examples the esteemed doctor used are, how shall I call it, going to the bathroom? Well, yeah. But that's not a compelling passion. I gotta have this. Yeah, I can say I'm going to wait to use the restroom, but that's not a craving that you have at the core of who you are. And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about, not just your routine day-by-day stuff you do. An illustration of the depth of depravity of human nature is the Second War, where a nation which was esteemed for culture, for education, for science, for intelligence, did the most unspeakable crimes. Unbelievable that this would happen. And the problem simply is that, as the doctor, I'm glad he acknowledges this, that basically at our core we are self-centered and pleasure-seeking. Me first. For shame, there was a book that came out in the 1980s saying, looking out for number one. Guess who that's supposed to be? Moi. And that's human nature, and you ain't going to change that with therapy, ain't going to change that with a talk session, ain't going to change it by rationalizing it. It is the core of who you are. And the only solution, once again, is to get a new nature.
Another compelling example I'd like to give for people getting over addictions without outside help is some IRA protesters in England in the 1980s. In 1981, there were IRA protesters who decided that they were in prison and they wanted England to change their policies, and they decided that a useful tactic would be fasting. So they fasted in prison. They gave up food. Probably the most powerful addiction we have is to eat when we're hungry. And they didn't eat for many, many days. In fact, 10 of them died of starvation. Bobby Sands was one of them in 1981. After 66 days, he died of starvation because he had such power, and he used it over his addictions, his biological cravings, his nature, all those things. He used his mind to counter that.
And now we cut to the chase to answer the question, how? There's only one way. I'm going to use the term higher power. It takes a power outside of yourself to give you a new nature. And what you can do is ask for it. That also involves giving up on yourself and acknowledging I cannot do it myself, but I want a new heart and a new nature. Ask for that, and I believe that it is possible, certainly, for you to receive that and get a fresh start in life. I know because I've experienced it. I was quite a violent type in my earlier years. I won't go into gory details, but I also experienced that new nature. And I know the before and after difference. It's night and day. It works. Thank you.